Yeah, well, I'm sure Mark's thought about it.
Part 3, a special bit here with Stewie, because all of you want a bit of Stewie. There's plenty of him.
Now, Stewie, when you used to come on the Punters Show, you'd come on and you'd say, the game's gone. The game's gone, the game's gone. Like everyone else has in the racing industry ever since we've known it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Is the game gone?
Well, I've had a little hiatus. I've been out of the game, well, with the exception of Saturdays, I've been out of the game like the full-time, 24/7, 52 weeks a year sort of. I've been out of that for about 6 months now, and I'm just ready to get back into it. I think we all need to freshen up, basically, and I took a spell.
Oh.
I just to get the love back, because it became very mundane, very.
What have you been doing for 6 months?
Well, I've still been doing the form for a Saturday, but for the rest of the time, I've just been, doing other things, basically.
But what were you doing before?
What do you mean? I was looking at every race that was going around in New South Wales.
Every race in New South Wales?
I'm not necessarily doing the form on every race, but I was watching every single race, and I was making comment on every single race. I was updating a database on every single race.
All right, so you mentioned the database. You're a ratings to win man.
I'm not anymore.
Right, so, well, give us a critique.
Well, I basically took 6 months off, and I didn't need that sort of power of data behind me. So I had another database that I was using, the GTX, and at the time previous to that I was using both. But when I had my hiatus, I dropped off the Access program.
Right, and
I found it was overkill for me.
Right, it was.
I'm a creature of habit, unfortunately, right or wrong, and I'm used to doing things a certain way. And the GTX is what I took a long time to get away from the sportsman and from printed form guides. So,
you are.
I am a dinosaur.
All right, so tell us your opinion of the features of those two systems.
Well, I guess Access is more of a database. The GTX is more race day files. But the GTX still allows you to do queries upon those race day files. Maybe not to the extent you can't break it down quite as far as Access, but nonetheless you can still break it down. And the rest of the functionality I found very similar. So at the end of the day, I did like the extra little bells and whistles that Access had, but it was a bit of overkill for me, especially in a period where I wasn't looking to be doing a lot.
Okay. And would you recommend either of those things, or what sort of punter would you need to be to have either of those?
I think if you're coming in fresh, I think if you were starting up your database from scratch and you were looking to do that, to record that sort of information, I probably would start with the Access, and I'd become familiar with that database because, like I said, there's more bells and whistles. If you're starting from scratch and you're learning the whole thing from the ground up, if you're more stubborn and set in your ways and you're used to doing things a certain way, well then I'll be sticking to what works, or I wouldn't be drifting too far from where you had been. And for me, that was the GTX program.
Well, the thrust of my question is partly the game's gone, but anyone who comes into the game now, any young guy, will think it's fantastic.
Yes.
Like we did. We turned up and we went, wow, how good is this? And that will continue to happen, no matter how far it deteriorates for other people, because they're just seeing what they're seeing and they're not seeing what's missing, because they don't know what's missing.
Yeah, it's like, I remember back in the 80s when it was just like 72 bookies, and the old blokes would grab you, oh, this is gone. You should have seen what it used to be like. You remember that?
I do.
And you go, really? It was better than this? Yeah, you'd run from here to the ledger, and then from the ledger to the silver ring.
I think you guys put the clip on your website. There was a clip from like 1986 or something, the betting ring, and it was just absolutely jam-packed with punters. And the scary thing is it was 30 years ago, and I think we probably know most of them.
What about the young Dennis Simpson?
I saw that, yeah.
Oh, Bigelow taxi, like, wow, he's...
That was 30 years ago.
Yeah, and it's great to relive some of that, to recapture some of that. But in terms of playing the races today, Stewie, what sort of things are you looking for that you're allowed to talk about on the show?
Well, it starts with the form, but I think I wouldn't put 100 cents in the dollar in as far as the form is the be all and end all. I think being a clever gambler means as much as doing the form, but it's true itself. It's a point of reference, and it's a point where you have to start, whether you pay for that form or you do it yourself. I think you need an understanding of what the betting ring is showing you. So you need to go there with something, a foundation basically. But I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that you shouldn't be flexible, you shouldn't take heed of what the market tells you, and you shouldn't have good bets just for the pure reason that they are good bets. If you can trade a position, if you can see a price that's obviously wrong, I suggest you take it. I suggest you trade out if you can take profit at what you consider the bottom of the market. I think that's just as important, maybe more so than actually doing the form itself. But I think when you start with the form, you get a foundation of what you expect to see from the market. I think without that foundation, you're sort of a bit blind.
Right. So it's fundamental knowledge that will then enable you,
to take a position that's more profitable, or at least Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you go in there with your eyes closed and you do no work and you turn the computers on and you look at betting fluctuations, you don't really get a feel for it. You don't really understand why the horse started at a certain point and why it's heading in a certain direction. If you look at the form guide, you sort of get an overall foundation of where it's starting and where it should be heading, which is pretty much a service you provide, Mark.
Yeah, okay. How do you feel about situations that you can't make sense of?
Well, generally they're the ones I pass on. Unfortunately, sometimes you're so engrossed into a situation, i.e. the Admiral Jello race, that the first time you realise you're wrong and something doesn't add up here, you've already invested X amount of dollars and there's nowhere to run.
Actually, the first time you think you're wrong is when they pass the winning post. You go,
no, I realised something was wrong when they were taking 280 on bet for Admiral Jello. Something's just not adding up to me here, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And all the positions that I do had open ended up being very poor positions. At that point, I was in for a penny, and I either had to cut and run, which I did to a degree, but I was so heavily involved that I basically had to take my medicine. And halfway down the straight, I had to swallow it.
But what about actually, because I think it's quite important for us to be able to make sense of what has occurred.
Most definitely.
Are you able, but there must be times where you can't make sense of what's occurred.
No, definitely. That scenario, you try and analyse, you try and post-race and analyse it and sort of, rethink what variables have changed or what variables you didn't consider that could have conceived what you've just watched. But sometimes the answer's a pineapple. Sometimes, you look at something and you can't make heads or tails of it, and that is frustrating, there's no doubt, especially from a future point of view, because you're going forward trying to reference those horses out of those races and trying to think, well, how do I reference those efforts considering what I saw Admiral Jello do at the price that they were happy to justify. So, yeah, mate, that's an extreme situation. Hopefully it doesn't happen too often, but it definitely happens, and sometimes there just isn't an answer.
Okay, so our relationship with you goes back a long way, and you were well known for cutting out unprofitable aspects of your business. So
Yes.
you would say, for example,
I'm not betting at Warwick Farm.
I'm not betting at Warwick
Yes.
Farm, or I'm not going to
You
Wyong.
back betting there yet?
So about a year ago, I did a complete reverse flip. I decided that my turnover was dropping at such an alarming rate that I had to take on other venues. It brought on a whole heck of a much bigger workload for me, but I ran that for about 8 months. It was not profitable and it did my head in, and I think that's probably the reason in March last year I just decided, not that I'd had enough, but that I needed a break. And I needed to want to do it again. I needed to want to engross myself in the form. I needed to want to get up in bed every day and not find it the chore that I was finding it. So I did do a complete reverse flip and I found it didn't work, and I'm now going back to...
So you gave those things another chance, is that what you're saying?
I started betting in Western Australia. I started betting on all sorts of places. I started doing the form for those places. I started creating databases for those places. And for me personally, it wasn't profitable. I couldn't cut out an edge above the syndicates and above other people that were making money there. So I realised my shortcomings and I stopped doing it, but I decided to take a break from all that at the same time. And at that point I was only really concentrating since March onwards, probably Saturday race meetings, watching the Wednesdays and not even interested in the rest of the meetings. Just so I think you do anything for long enough, you become stale, it becomes, almost mandatory and mundane. I needed to want to do it again, and I needed to enjoy doing it, and I needed to become, I needed to enjoy trying to work out the puzzle.
So are you back to that point?
I'm starting right now, so the new year.
Oh,
Yes.
the new year.
New year. So I've
Oh,
done
that's
2
so
meetings far.
exciting.
You've done 2 meetings.
Okay, do you still feel that you have an edge to use?
My results would suggest that I will be profitable, but not enough that I'm going to be living the Bible, so to speak.
Right,
It's
so your
definitely not what it used to be.
supernormal is in the past.
Yeah, 100%. What I was doing is now outdated. It's now mainstream form analysis or mainstream gambling, and I don't have the edge that I have. You realise that, you move on, you try and make subtle changes. I don't want to deviate too far from the norm. But research and development is definitely a big part of what I do. Trying to tweak what doesn't work anymore, or where my coefficients are wrong. Like the weighting I was putting on certain aspects is now not the same because the market is already valuing it to that extent.
So are you doing this R&D yourself?
Yes, I'm stubborn. It would be better if I
What
could
does R&D
outsource
mean?
this.
Research and development.
Okay, prime example. Horses on the quick backer. Okay, you go back 10 years, especially in staying races, it was very, very profitable. There was obviously a huge advantage in predominantly just backing those horses. And a lot of the syndicates still do, but that edge has been so overplayed by the market that it's just not an advantage anymore. So the weighting I was putting on that coefficients just had to come down, 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 down.
So you're saying that was already factored into its price?
It is now. It wasn't then. Or it wasn't weighted enough then. It is now, and it's probably overplayed now. While the reverse is true for leading jockeys, you can still back, your Nash Willis, your Darren Beamans, your James McDonald, and still make money over a period of time because the market's still not weighting that heavily enough.
What, and never will? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it ever will. I just think there's always a perception that the rating that we put on jockeys is a small degree and not something to be overplayed. While the results say you're not playing it enough, but the market is undervaluing the extent of the jockey.
And how quickly do you think the market reacts to edges that are discovered?
I think data's probably got a shelf life of about 6 months. So every 6 months I want to try and recalibrate. But how quick do I think the market? I think the market's very slow in reacting. I think it's very methodical in the way that it moves. It rises and declines at a very not rapid rate, at a very, very gentle rate.
And what do you say about the marketplace that we have now compared to the marketplace of, let's say, 10 years ago?
Well, obviously I'm disappointed. It's not fluid, it's not vibrant. It's extremely hard to get on. People aren't competitive. The nature of bookmaking's changed, where predominantly it's profiling customers, not horses or prices. And it makes someone like myself, it makes it very, very hard to get on.
But you're still able to get on?
Nowhere near to the degree I was getting on 10 years ago, and I've tried all different facets and different ways to get on. As far as the totalisator...
Have you used boulders?
Yeah, of course I have.
Oh.
As far as the totalisator stuff concerned, it's now populated with predominantly zero-sum players who are just in there for the rebates. So, trying to cut out an edge out of that market's tough. Fixed odds market obviously is tough because it's hard to get on, but there are discrepancies there, but not so much in the markets I'm playing. Sydney's a pretty pure market at the end of the day. I guess if you're trying to cut out an edge at Ipswich or provincial Western Australia, you could find huge disparities in the market from time to time. You just have to be patient and pick your spot.
I think Gold Coast on a Saturday is a favourite venue, isn't it?
For sure.
You bet at Gold Coast on Saturday?
Well, up till March, I was betting across 4 states.
I can't imagine you being a
I can't. Well, no, but he was like that as a kid. Remember, he was just like.
Oh, because you were playing the overs and like.
Well, I was looking at West Australia, South Australia, Queensland, and New South Wales. I was staying away from Victoria.
And that surprised me because Victoria, you think would be.
Well, I assumed that I would run into the same problems I ran into in New South Wales that I'd run into in Victoria. That the market was very pure in just about every essence.
But have you actually investigated Victoria?
No, not particularly.
So you just
Well, I was looking at disparate markets, and Victoria wasn't predominantly going to give me disparate markets. While I assumed the other states of Australia were. And I wasn't interested in Tasmania, and I wasn't interested in Northern Territory, so I just looked elsewhere.
Right, and
but don't get me wrong, this didn't work for me.
Yeah, so, but also you still need to be able to get set. So how do you get set in those far-flung places?
Well, it was predominantly totalisator, and it was predominantly pari-mutuel.
Wow.
And I was betting the sides that the pari-mutuel total allowed me to do.
Yeah.
So you still see, you still see a future for a professional punter?
Well, I'm so immersed in this industry that yes, I do. Because
is that wishful thinking? You actually want to see a future, so you'll see the future?
No, I don't think so. I think whatever something is subjective, which obviously horse racing is, that there is, the skill or opinion is always going to play its part, and therefore we're always going to get markets where people have come to different conclusions. And whenever they come to different conclusions, you've got to imagine that from one person's perspective, there's going to be values or there's going to be unders and overs, so to speak. So, no, I do think someone who immerses themselves in the game and is prepared to do the work will generally, as long as they've got a good foundation, be able to cut themselves out a living, even though I think in this current market it'll only be a small living. I think 20 years ago, I think people like us three had a huge advantage on the market. The ring was vibrant, there was lots of money there, there were just disparate markets all over the place, and we could just pick and choose our spots.
But we thought it was tough then.
Well, no, I did not thought I'd be retired by now.
All right, retirement is another thing where you still need the challenge.
No, you need to be engrossed. It's a wrong choice of word. I would have thought I would be able to take a far more back seat. That's probably what I'm trying to say.
What do you make of the way that, say, Dr. Nick has morphed his business?
It's just incredible. He's an absolute superstar, Dr. Nick. What he's been able to turn that into and been able to cut out the margins that he has, that he obviously is. He's basically got, I won't say every bright spark in the racing industry, but just about everyone me and seems to have gone and worked there, and he's obviously paying them well, and he's obviously generating enough turnover and profit to substantiate what he pays them. So I'm amazed that he can cut out that sort of margin.
So is that a Jelko alternative? Is that where he is?
So. I don't know whether they're similar or not, to be quite honest with you. I can only assume that they must be, but whatever they're doing, whatever intelligence they're using is still well above the market. And you've got to think, well, if they can do it, then there must be an edge. So I'm not sure. I can only assume that they're assuming high turnover, small margin. I would assume, but I don't know that as fact.
But that's
No
the
one
problem.
knows.
That's the problem. We'd all like high turnover, but how do you get high turnover in this marketplace?
Well, I'm assuming he's just a worldwide business, and that he's not just talking about New South Wales. He's talking about Bulgaria and wherever else. The North Atlantic could be anywhere. So I don't know how they. I don't know locality-wise how they make that work, but obviously they have. Obviously, it's a corporation. It's a worldwide corporation, not just the entity that we're talking about, which is basically New South Wales based.
So how would you feel about being part of an organisation rather than the sole trader that you seem to have been?
Yeah, in the last year, I think I find that enticing, and I want to play with the new toys, and I want to learn, and I want to see how you can approach this puzzle from a different avenue. I would be.
But you're still a young man, You're not even 50.
I'm getting close.
How old are you?
I'm going to turn 49 this year.
I thought I was a lot older than you.
What are you? You guys are early 50s, aren't you?
That's because he was a baby when we came across him.
I suppose, when you came to your 18, I was probably 25, 3 or 24.
You guys were at the track the first day I worked. Mark, you were my pencil the first day I worked in 1988. I looked it up the other day.
Talking about first day you worked, talking about when first people worked, I was the first person to work for Dr. Nick when he started his enterprise. Did you know this?
No, I did not.
Yeah. When Dr.
And what
Nick,
happened?
He wanted to pay me $80 a bet, and I went, "Hey, are you all right in the head, mate?" And he said, "No, that'll be sweet." One race he backed 3 horses in the race, so my wages were $240 for the race.
Yeah.
Like, it was just the most amazing amount of wages, $600-700 a day, putting his bets on, and I thought, how fat is this? And then it took me away from looking at the horses because I had to be in the ring, and then he wanted to not bet this race, not back 2 in this race, and after about 3 or 4 weeks, I said, this fucking bloke is a complete imbecile. This is what I thought to myself. I said, I've done my wages every day being with him. He hasn't looked like backing a fucking winner. I'm going to toss this job that quick. What a fucking wombat this bloke is. He won't last a month.
But he was also a mate of sorts, like Steve Collins.
No. Me and Doctor have never really been mates. I know Doctor. I would always say hello to him, but you're not mates. I know who he is.
No, I mean he was one of the people in the ring that we all hung out with.
Well, I didn't really hang out with him.
No, in the ring I'm talking about.
Yeah, but not a mate. And he came to me because Steve said Glenn would be the best to get your money on. And I said, he will not last 2 fucking minutes.
Good call, mate.
I'm the fucking best. I am the best.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd be keeping that story to myself,
It's the truth, huh? He started, the first person he employed to put his bets on, before there was an office, before there was fucking Maseratis and fucking everything, and I thought, this fucking bloke is a fucking googie egg. And I had to brush the job because my only way to bet was to use my bit of form with his tips, because his tips were going to be good because they're firming.
Yes.
This is before bet, I couldn't trade out of it because I had to work for him, and I kept thinking, I'm just going to, it doesn't matter if I get a monkey a day off the fucker, I'm going to do it.
Good call, mate.
Yeah. That was like when I was a big bookie and someone said, "Oh, you want to get a sports betting license?" I said, "Football." Then Worcester back South at Cronulla. 2 options, fuck off. All my calls have been really good. Now you go to a football match, there's 550 different ways you can bet. Oh, it's just hilarious.
What a marvel he is, Dr. Nick. Whatever he's doing,
I don't know how he's done
theorems, neither do I.
We've kept you long enough, Stewie, but tell me, just to finish off, you're sitting down there doing the form. What gets you excited seeing something in a horse's form? What sort of makes you just...
Or is it just the boxes you tick?
That's a good question. It is the boxes I tick, yes. What gets me excited? It gets me excited when I finish the form and I log on to something like Dynamic Race Odds and I see the prices are going up. Then I get a little warm, fuzzy feeling when I see different markets.
Oh, so there's nothing in a horse's form that you look at and you go, wow, that's really engaged me, that's turned me on, that's switched me on, I like what that horse is doing.
It's just all analytical. I just think from that point of view, it's just all numbers.
It's basically, you've marked something in your head, 7-2, and you've done it, and there it is, $2.10. You go, wow, I can get that beat.
100%.
I think that's what it always is you've painted the picture. I'm not trying to talk for you.
No, you're right.
You've produced the picture, and then when the picture comes up to you and it's the complete opposite, like when you get my Manning Yard Mark, there's a couple of races there lately, I'm backing number 2, but this is a race of little edge. I mean, it's a fucking yawn.
It's a good question, Bob, Mark. You got me.
I think it's when you first see the market.
I think so too.
because there it is.
I don't think the form gets me excited. I think the market gets me excited.
It's like, you know, you thought, think of Miss World, best tits, best body, great legs. You go, oh, that's a nice warm fuzzy. And now she walks over here. Fucking hell, here she is. Imaginary.
Look, I must say that I get very excited when I see things like Imposing Lass, first up at Warwick Farm, having her first city start. I remember resuming off the Wild Maiden win, and I went, oh wow, I really like what that horse did last start, and this is resuming at home at 1400 with Jay Collard and blah blah blah. I went, yes, I love that. And then I logged on, it was $13, and I went, wow.
And
But it doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. Anyway,
Well,
thanks so much to Stuart. Thanks so
pleasure,
much,
mate.
mate.
My
Good on
pleasure,
you, mate.
Thanks,
Well,
Stewie.
good to see you boys again.
Yeah,
He's always
great.
been a fan of the rant and the punny show, even though he never watches any of the
No, I
episodes.
do watch it.
Anyway, we'll be Gordon and I will be along for a midweek preview of Warwick Farm. We've got a heavy week this week, Glenn. We've got Warwick Farm, Gosford, Canterbury Friday night,
I'll be
back to Randwick on Saturday,
Preview show for Randwick.
and Weil on Sunday.
And hopefully Gord's brought us a quick horse up north. And keep your eye on that space. Yeah, Gord's
RacingRant
Gord's up there now
syndication.
going 600,000. See you later.
Good luck, boys.
Thanks, Stuart.
My pleasure.